Hello everyone, Jim Staley here, Passion for Truth Ministries, and we are back live in the studio today. It is 7 p.m. Central Standard Time. I pray that God is blessing you and doing amazing things in your life. And if He's not, it's only because you don't recognize what He's doing in disguise. So He is setting you up for a great supernatural breakthrough in your life. And that's what the next 27 days are all about. The last two nights, we've been discussing the month of Elul, which is the 12th month on the Hebrew calendar that leads us up to the Feast of Trumpets, Yom Teruah, or better known today as Rosh Hashanah, which is all about the coming of the Messiah. If you've heard in the scriptures in the New Testament, the Brit Hadashah says, and the dead in Christ will rise at the sound of a trumpet, right? That trumpet is referring to the Feast of Trumpets, the blowing of trumpets. This is when the kings of Israel would become coordinated. No matter when they went into service, they did not officially become king until this day, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Teruah. And at some point in the future, some year in the future, I should say, the Messiah, Yeshua, Jesus the Christ, will come riding on the clouds, and he will take his place as king of this earth again. And we all look forward to that, and we wait with great expectation. But while we're waiting, we need to do one thing: prepare. And that's what we've been talking about the last two nights. We're going to continue to do that by introspectively looking inside of our own lives. This is the month where we stop arguing, we stop pointing fingers at our spouse and everybody else, we stop correcting everybody and telling everybody what they're doing wrong. This is the time where we realize that we're about to go behind the curtain, and we're going to be face to face with Yeshua himself. And that is this time period called Teshuvah, the time of returning, the time of introspective, the time of looking inside to fix what's broken. So the last two nights we've talked about Teshuvah, what it means. Last night we talked about discovering what is it that you're doing. What do your loved ones say that you can do better to be more like the Messiah? Because there's no one that knows you better than those who know you best. And those are typically the people that you live with. I've had an amazing time with my family as we watch these programs as well together as a family after they're produced. And then we spend time discussing as a family what we can do for one another. How can we change and make our family more in the image of Christ? And it's been an unbelievable journey already, and we've just begun. We're not even a week into this month-long journey, and I'm not joking. Supernatural, amazing things are happening in my family. Just to give you an idea, on day one, we watched the program. We're discussing these things as a family. We ended up discussing what happens after death and near-death experiences. And my 9-year-old asked the question, well, Daddy, will I go to heaven when I die? And I asked her the question, well, I don't know. Do you believe in Yeshua? And are you following his ways? And she said, well, I do believe in him, but I want to make sure that I go to heaven when I die, that I live with him. And so I had the privilege on day one of the month of Elul to have everyone heads bowed and eyes closed and to hold the hand of my 9-year-old Selah as she prayed a prayer for salvation. And not only did she prayed in her own words, asking Yeshua to come into her heart, to come into her life, and to help her live a godly life. Ladies and gentlemen, there is no better way to prepare for the high holy days in the fall than to lead your own daughter, your own child to the Messiah, and to watch the whole family light up as God begins to do amazing things in our midst. So that's how our first night started out. And so I'm excited tonight to share some of the things that I'm going to share with you. So let's dive right in because we're already 30% of the way finished with this broadcast. So I promised my staff I would not go over 15 minutes because there's a tremendous amount of production that happens behind the scenes. All right, so first and foremost, I want to share with you this amazing quote by Rabbi Shimon Jacobson. It comes from his book, 60 Days, A Spiritual Guide to the High Holy Days. It's a great book. I encourage you to get it if you don't have it. It's got some good nuggets in there. Not a believer in Yeshua, but there are some good nuggets in there, and I'm going to be using some of those throughout the next 29 days. But one of them is definitely this quote. He says, so the key to meaningful change is not so much knowing how to get to a new place. It's knowing how to unload the past so that it shouldn't shape your future and bring you back to your old patterns. Isn't that a great quote, you guys? The meaningful change is not so much knowing how to get to a new place, it's knowing how to unload the past, which shouldn't shape your future and bring you back to old patterns. You know, one of the most difficult parts of life, and I think you'll agree with me tonight, is not the present as much as it is dealing with the past and the present simultaneously. I know in my own life I have been more hurt and have gone through more muck and grime and pain than I think 2 lifetimes should be allowed to have. And dealing with the past of those have hurt me in the past, intentionally or unintentionally, it still hurts the same, doesn't it? So if you tonight, I'm going to talk tonight about to multiple groups of people, but specifically the groups of people that have had situations in their past that they're still dealing with. I want to give you a formula for how to get out of your past. Because in my own life, I know when I was taken away into captivity and I was dealing with that by itself, there were people that were very close to me that I had put my own ministry in charge of, my own ministry, that betrayed me and destroyed my entire life's work. Now, that's really difficult to swallow and to deal with the fact that the very people I trusted the most were the very people that were selling my website and destroying every teaching I'd ever done. How does that happen? And how do you forgive people for that kind of action? So I've dealt with some pain, and I know that you guys have dealt with some pain in your own life. How do we move past that to where the past doesn't shape your future in such a degree that you return to the old patterns? Because look, I like to give the analogy of a satellite dish as the frequency that we're supposed to receive from heaven. So everybody has a satellite dish, right? And when we're born, it's pointed directly to God himself, and it's receiving the frequency of heaven that allows us to live our life to our fullest. Then what happens is traumas and circumstances happen, and the enemy uses those traumatic emotional moments to reposition that satellite just ever so slightly. So at the worst case scenario, we're not receiving the full signal. It's a little static. It's like snow on a television from 1985, and you can't quite make out what the picture is. Best case scenario for the enemy, he completely repositions that satellite towards him to where everything that comes into that satellite is through the filter of bitterness, anger, resentment, revenge, jealousy, which is a huge one. So at the end of the day, our traumas have to be revisited, and we have to leave those traumas behind like we're leaving Egypt, or better yet, like we're leaving the land of the Chaldeans. So let's go over to Genesis chapter 12, verse 1. I want to share a verse with you of what God told Abraham of how to get out of his past and allow his past to influence his future, but only from the perspective of influencing his future for good. In other words, God allows our circumstances to happen, and it's designed to create greater faith, remove less control from our lives. And when we remove less control from our lives, it's putting more control back in his hands, right? And so when we move through our trials and tribulations and the circumstances in our lives, it's designed for us to turn over our lives more to the Father, which creates a amazing connection with him and sets up your future to be able to get the most of what God intended for your life. Genesis chapter 12, verse 1 says this: Now the Lord had said to Abram, get out of your country, from your family, from your father's house, to a land that I will show you. Let me read that one more time, because we're going to break it down. Now the Lord had said to Abram, get out of your country, from your family, and from your father's house to a land that I will show you. Okay, let's talk about this, because I believe the Father is showing us a pattern here, a formula for how do we get past our past? How do we let it go? Because the old adage of just, forgive and forget, I can tell you a perfect personal example, personal experience, I should say, it doesn't work. You cannot forget what happened to you. You cannot forget about what people do to you. You cannot forget about how life treats you. There's no way to forget about what your spouse did, what your child did, what your employer did, what your pastor might have done. You can't forget it. And you certainly have a difficult time of forgiving it. And we always intellectually forgive, but we have a hard time actually doing it from the heart. I recently called up an individual that I wanted to connect with and just repent before him of anything that I might have done to offend him. And this was 8 or 9 years ago. And I called him up and he wouldn't take my call. I texted him, wouldn't take my text. I emailed him and he emailed me back and said, I don't want to discuss anything that happened 10 years ago because I've already forgiven you. Now, ladies and gentlemen, this gentleman doesn't realize he hasn't forgiven anything, because if you can't have a conversation with the one that supposedly offended you 10 years ago, and you can't even take his call to apologize, then your heart is still scarred. It's still broken. It's still hurting. And that is the proof that we need to move past. That's proof that we haven't moved past our past. So here's, I believe, a formula. Let's move quickly. Number one, get out of your country. Abraham says, get out of your country. For Abraham, that was literal. For us, I believe it was a supernatural hint to what it means to get out of our country. To get out of our country is to get out of your comfort zone, to get out of where you've been living. If you've been living in the past and you've been judging somebody based on the past or a hurt that happened years ago, then you're living in the land of the Chaldeans. God says, get out of that country. Get out of it. In other words, leave the place of hurt and bitterness. Leave the place that is so comfortable, because we all love to be angry. Let's just be honest. We love to be bitter. We love to point the fingers at someone else. There's something inside of us that ignites and excites to be upset and to point the finger at someone else. And you know what that is? It's called the flesh. It's called the evil inclination that wants to hold on to anger and bitterness like a blankie, like a child does with a blankie at night. It can't sleep without it. And many of us, many of you that are out there today are holding on to your past or holding on to your bitterness because you can sleep at night. You're so comfortable with it. You've had it for so long, you don't want to get rid of it. God says, get rid of that country. Get rid of that blanket. Get out of your country. Pick it up. Say, your first thing that you got to do in order to get over your past is make the decision, I'm going to get out of this country. I'm not going to be like this anymore. I'm going to burn this. I'm going to grow up and I'm going to get rid of my blankie. I'm not going to hold on to my pacifier anymore because it's comfortable. I'm going to throw it away. The first step to healing is 100% making that decision. Number two, he says, get out of your country, from your family and from your father's house. Your family and the father's house of Abram, they were idol worshipers. They were idol makers even. And so God tells Abram, listen, you can't just get out of your country that you've grown up with, that you're comfortable with. You need to get away from the very people that are feeding this issue inside of you, that are feeding this anger, feeding this bitterness, feeding the problems of your past, reminding you how much these people hurt you or your spouse hurt you. Whatever is reminding you, those people cut out of your life, God says. It's the only way. You cannot say, I'm going to eat organic and I'm not going to eat junk food anymore, and then stop by a fast food restaurant and order something with a friend. Don't do it, because that's going to influence you to want and tempt you to go back to your father's house. Number one, get out of that country. Mentally decide, I'm not going to stay here anymore. Number two, cut out all relationships and conversations that deal and feed that anger. And number 3, it says, go to a land that I'll show you. This is the most beautiful part about how God works, and we're almost finished here today. And he says, I want you to just walk away. I want you to walk into a new light. I want you to walk into new freedom. And how you do that is different for everybody, because Yahweh knows where you're at. He knows what you need. And so he's going to bring you to a place where he's going to show you exactly what you need. You don't know what you need. I don't know what I need. And so I'm going to close this short broadcast, and we're going to kind of cut this in half, and we're going to pick up tomorrow night right where we left off today and talk some more about Abraham and how we can leave our past, because I believe the Father wants to exercise this and to extrapolate this a little bit more. So we're going to close right here, but I want to just challenge each and every one of you. Write these steps down. Number 1, get out of your country. Make the decision to make a change. Number 2, stop having communication with people that are going to feed into that past or that hurt, because that's the enemy. And if you can't stop the relationship, let them know, hey, listen, I've decided to use the Abraham formula. I'm leaving that behind. And the first thing I got to do is to make that decision. And 2, I got to stop allowing any kind of information to feed that hurt. No more discussion that's going to relate and revolve, I should say, around my past and my hurt. I'm going to move on to a land that I will show you. Tomorrow night, we'll discuss what is that land and what does that look like and how do we get there. All right, well, we've come to the end of our short broadcast tonight. I pray that God is blessing you through this broadcast. If he is and you're being blessed, go to our YouTube channel at Jim Staley Teachings, or go to our Facebook page, Jim Staley Official, or our website, passionfortruth.com. Partner with us, watch our videos, be blessed. It is exciting to be back and to minister you to today, and I cannot wait to see what God's going to do in the preparation for these high holidays coming up. Until tomorrow night, have a great evening. I'm Jim Staley. Shalom.